Hi there. This is the extra recording for chapter 4.8 that we weren't able to get to in our class. I just want to mention a few things that I think are important in this chapter. So, the reason I assigned you this chapter is because when I was in art school, I always got impatient with getting to the content at the end of the book. Um, Most art history books are in chronological format, and so they go from way, way, way back when to ancient times until now, until the current moment. So that was kind of my inspiration behind assigning one of the last chapters in the book. And if you have an older edition of the book, you may not even have this chapter. I'm not sure. So I have a few slides that I'm going to show you today. But the first thing that I want to do is I want to read the introduction to this chapter because I think it's really good and it speaks to some of it speaks to the importance of this chapter. So let me just share with you the slides. Okay, let's see here. All right. The visual language of art can be an extremely effective means of communicating a point of view on social issues. While words can describe an event, art can demonstrate it visually with raw power. Art often reflects historical, social, and political concerns. It can even provoke change. Art is able to arouse such strong emotions that artworks themselves can become the focus of protest, sometimes suffering damage or destruction as a result. Art can also inspire us towards a better and more just world. This chapter is concerned with the ways that artists have expressed their convictions through artworks that have at times caused powerful and even violent reactions. So that's just the first paragraph opening to the book. And what it describes is what all of these artworks are going to show, strong reactions that were really telling of that specific moment in time. Controversial, yes, but more so it's telling us about, like it said, the historical, social, and political context of these images. So it's interesting, but the first artwork that they open the chapter with is Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Géricault. And Raft of the Medusa doesn't seem like a political piece at first, but once you kind of start to learn about the history and what this piece is depicting, then you start to understand that at the time this was a really shocking piece. So, firstly, one of the things that's most shocking about this piece, and this painting was made in 1819. One of the shocking things about this piece is that it's full of trauma, right? It's full of trauma. There's dead bodies, there's people who are ravaged. The colors are very, sepia toned, and you can tell that these are folks who are distraught, right? And at the time, you didn't really have paintings that were glorifying this kind of trauma or this kind of violence that they were experiencing, right? Um, but at the same time, it does have a sense of beauty and romanticism, and so this painting is technically a part of the romanticism time period. But it looks quite different than portraits and scenes of people playing and enjoying themselves. This is a scene of despair, right? Also in this painting, it connects really well to chapter 1.1 in that we see lines. And what are the lines that you see, right? So this painting is very famous for being composed in an X. So you have your eye is being directed into these like forms, right? So you have from the top of the ship here down to the bottom over here. You have the top of the man here, and your eye is being drawn, even following the piece of clothing down over here, right? And that's emphasized with this other kind of line in the shipwreck. Um, in the book, it gives you a little bit of background of this piece, but I'll just read it to you so that we're on the same page here. On July 2nd, 1816, the French naval vessel Medusa ran aground off the coast of West Africa. While the captain and approximately 250 crew boarded the lifeboats, the rest of the passengers, 146 men and one woman, some of them slaves, got onto a makeshift raft that had been built from the wreckage. Although the raft was pulled by the lifeboats initially, the captain soon abandoned it. Left to battle starvation, sunburn, disease, and dehydration, only 15 men survived the horrors of the sea. Some cannibalized their shipmates. And so his painting shows the emotional intensity, of this moment. But why it's in this chapter of art and protest and social conscience is that it is critical of the government. And this can be seen as state-sanctioned violence, right? They were failed, the government and their country failed in protecting them. And so that's kind of the commentary that is being reminded to us through this. Why were these people left to die, right? Why were these people not rescued? Was it neglect? Was it that they could have been saved, but they weren't, right? It also draws our attention to the issue of slavery. There were African slaves aboard this ship, and in the composition, you see an African man at the top of the pile waving somebody down, right? And so at the time, this was actually showing progress in terms of like racial equality. It is a shipwreck that is, yes, depicting the movement of African slaves away from their home, but people saw this and interpreted it as the Black man bringing them home, right? The Black man like helping like save the French folks, right? And so now it's not seen, that way. Now we are a bit more critical in terms of like the role that the French played in colonialism and slavery. And so this piece is one of those controversial pieces at the moment that ignited all of these feelings within people. This is another piece by Margulies called En el aire, in the air. And in the book, you'll read that this piece, first of all, this is an installation. So an installation is something where in order to understand the artwork, you must like walk through it, be immersed in it. And so the artwork here is this installation of bubbles being blown throughout the gallery. And the bubbles are representative of people who have been killed at the hands of cartels in Mexico. So Teresa Margulies, she was a medical examiner in Mexico City, and she saw kind of the onslaught of folks who had been killed in Mexico City because of this very reason, because of the cartels, because of the government backing the cartels. And so she decided to not just have bubbles, but have bubbles made from the water that was used to wash the corpses. In her experience, she washed the corpses, she completed autopsies, and it's this very like intimate experience, right? And so as an artist, she somehow collected this water that was used to wash the bodies and repurposed it to create these bubbles. And it's meant to kind of like impact you in that way, right? It's a very visceral experience. So that's the emotion and the feeling that she's trying to use in this artwork. We have Pedro Reyes, Balas por Pistolas, Guns for Shovels. And these shovels were previously guns, so guns that were given up by, or what is the word? Not given up, but released, or they were there was this program that Reyes created where you could relinquish, that's the word, where you could relinquish your gun and he would use it for an art project. And so that art project consisted of melting down the guns, creating shovels, using those shovels to plant trees. So this piece does kind of focus on that life cycle of violence, the threat of violence, to melting it down, creating something new, and then building from that. So I really love this piece, and I love how it shows that you can physically transfigure these objects that are seemingly used for death or for violence and turn it into something useful, like a shovel. This is a piece mentioned in the book by Velasquez, the Toilet of Venus, the Toilet of Venus. And this picture is a very famous picture that depicts the pinnacle of beauty at the time for women. It's supposed to show elegance and grace, and just kind of this all-encompassing, like, this is self-care at 100. She's staring at herself in the mirror. She's naked on some silk sheets, and this was really meant to represent like beauty of women, right? And as a result of this piece, you have different reactions, and one of those reactions was by a suffragette, or an early, feminist, who went into the gallery and took a tool and made slashes in the painting. And so art, because it elicits emotions, because it touches on history, politics, because it is a subject matter that is to be interpreted, it's not always going to have a positive effect or influence on someone, right? There's a lot of artwork that's meant to elicit anger. And she took it to the next level, and I think that kind of created a new dialogue with this art piece of someone who is obviously very fed up with sexism, and she thought that this image was, damaging for women, right? And so at the time, for the suffragettes, this was a very, very important action. And it was also a protest against the imprisonment of one of their leaders, Emmeline Pankhurst. And so this act, not only was it meant to destroy the picture, but it's meant to protest something very specific. And so art can be symbolic in that way. It can be used to represent something, right? This is an art piece by Eric Fischel, Falling Woman. In the book, this piece talks about how it was unveiled 1 year after 9/11 and the falling of the World Trade Center. And it just talked about how the reception of this piece was not positive, in the sense that some people reacted very viscerally. They thought that this was disrespectful, in that it shows a woman falling from the towers, to her death. And this is a great example of intention sometimes not aligning with reception, right? But I do want to make a point that this piece was also highly revered. So this piece also brought a lot of, what is the word? It brought a lot of like kind of conclusion. The book does a really good job of describing it. They considered it a powerful reminder, a valid, even cathartic response to what happened, and that the sculpture itself wasn't meant to hurt anybody. It was a sincere expression of the deepest sympathy for the vulnerability of the human condition. And so as a result, this piece was covered up. It was censored, but a lot of people were upset that it was censored, because for them, it was very meaningful and impactful, and it made them feel seen, right? So censorship is not always the answer. Art is a great method for freedom of expression. And just because one group decides that it is horrendous doesn't mean that another group won't find it healing and lovely, right? Let's keep going. I do want you to read the section on on degenerate art, modern art during the Nazi campaign. I think it's very, very important, and it does talk about the harms of censorship, right? Censoring modern art was one of the methods of Nazis and Nazism to control their values and their message. And so there were many instances of artists not being allowed to create artwork. If they did, they would be jailed. If they did, their artwork would be destroyed. So this is a really great section to read about. And then art that raises social awareness. So this is kind of the second half of art and protest, art and social awareness. Art uses the power of visual language to spur involvement in social issues. So it calls our attention to social things that are happening. Again, it can be a symbol of something that is wrong in their opinion, right? It can be a symbol of protest. Dorothea Lange, migrant mother, this photo was captured of a mother who is living in poverty because she and her family are farm workers. And there's some controversy behind this image in that the subject of the image, meaning the woman in the center, she did not necessarily want her photo taken in this moment, and she was never compensated for being the subject of this artwork. And you can imagine this artwork is, collected by the Library of Congress in Washington. It's sold, for a lot of money, and you don't have any of that money going to the woman who is actually in poverty, there with her children, right? This artwork did draw some funds to the farm that she worked at, but when the funds got there, she was no longer working there. So it's just an example of pointing to an issue of social importance, but using a subject in a way that can be harmful. This is Shirin Nishat. I love Shirin Nishat. She's amazing. So this is a series called Women of Allah series, and she's very shocking in her imagery. One reason I love her so much is because she mostly uses black and white photography. She uses text in her artwork, and her images are just very, very powerful. So this image is talking about the juxtaposition between being a woman of Muslim faith and also being someone who's expected to be a soldier of Islam, and what that complex identity looks like and feels like. When you look at this image, you're not sure what the barrel of the gun is. At first you might think it's a piece of jewelry. It's not clear whether it's a gun right away. And then when you kind of like take a deeper look, you see the intent in her eyes, you see kind of that ridge on the top of the barrel, and you start to kind of put together that this is a woman on a mission, right? And someone who might be conflicted in their mission as well. In the artwork, there's a very, very small text kind of scrolling over the image, and she often likes to include just text from poems, from her writings, and I love just that little detail that she puts in. So Shirin Nishat she makes a lot of artwork now, today, and I recommend following her. She's great. Okay, and lastly, this is a piece by Cheryl Rowland III. This is called The Jumpsuit Project. The Jumpsuit Project is another artwork that you can follow on Instagram, for example. So the Jumpsuit Project is meant to draw attention to false incarcerations of Black Americans, right, of African Americans. And what he did is created this kind of social experiment where he went around wearing the jumpsuit to all of his classes. So he is a graduate student, an artist, and when he was falsely imprisoned for a year, he used this as an opportunity to think about how many other folks are in his position who are falsely imprisoned. And so when he got out, he wore the jumpsuit to his classes and wrote down and documented all of these different social interactions between him and professors, him and students, him and people at the grocery store, and what the orange jumpsuit you know, what it symbolizes in terms of criminality and how we treat quote unquote criminals, right? In the sense that they're not allowed to vote, they can't get a job. And is this something that really benefits society, or is it something that should be abolished once and for all? So I encourage you to follow him in the Jumpsuit Project. Because it's an ongoing project. And then, well, real quickly, I did mention the Black Lives Matter street mural, I think they're calling it. And this is an artwork that isn't made by a professional artist. So this mural was started because the mayor wanted to install it, and then he also changed the name of the street as well. But yeah, so this is a project that's instigated by the mayor of Washington, D.C., and he had construction workers go out and paint Black Lives Matter across the street, right? But the Black community, the Black Lives Matter chapter in Washington, D.C., saw this act as inauthentic and just a way of kind of pacifying the protesters, because this had happened like a week or two after the protests, and it just didn't seem like a real enough change, right, for them. And the fact that this is now seen as, you know, an art piece, a mural painted by construction workers, there's a lot more context that needs to be understood in the fact that this was not created, you know, by the people for the people. This is created by the state, and we need to understand these different levels with artwork, especially if you have state-sponsored artwork that is to be read as an act of protest. So what the people did is they added their own section where they drew equal signs saying defund the police, right? And so this is pointing to what the people really are wanting from the government, what their demands are in terms of how we can get to a place of liberation for Black folks. And if Black lives really matter, what that means is defunding the police who are unsensibly or senselessly, senselessly killing Black folks, right? Okay, so that's what I have for you today, and good luck on the quiz, and thank you so much for viewing this extra video. Next week I'm going to just kind of hone in on a few artworks and not try to cover so many, so we can kind of go into more detail so you won't have to consume as many hours of video throughout the week. But thank you, good job on week 1, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.